Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting started. We had some technical difficulties, but my name is John Zemko. I'm the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. And welcome to the next in our series on the future of work in Latin America and the Caribbean. This particular session today will be on the future of work in Colombia's regions most affected by poverty and violence. As you all know, Colombia has struggled with the issues of poverty and violence, and has come to some peace accords, but of course the pandemic is creating particular challenges for this region. And today we're going to focus a little bit of attention on exactly how things are working in those parts of Colombia and what we can learn from it from other challenged areas of the region. So today I'm delighted to feature three speakers. Antes de empezar, quiero mencionar que los que hablan español, se puede buscar el indicador de interpretation para traducción al español. Today we have three speakers. We're delighted to present Minister Councilor Emilio Archila, who's the Presidential Advisor for Stabilization and Consolidation in Colombia. He has over 20 years of service in Colombia's government in various capacities, and he's particularly focused on these regions of the country that are most experiencing poverty and violence, which we know as the PDETS. The Center for International Private Enterprise has been very engaged in developing an observatory for exactly how investment is going in these regions. And I'm delighted to present as our second speaker, Jaime Artiaga, who's the director of this observatory, Private Investment Observatory program. He's the general director of Jaime Artiaga y Asociados. And third, we have Natalie Renaud, who's co-deputy director of the USAID Colombia Program Office. She oversees programs in private sector engagement, environment compliance, and gender and inclusion on cross-cutting themes. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to turn the microphone over to the Minister Councilor, who will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, followed by our other two speakers for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will enter into question and answers. So without further ado, I would like to turn the microphone over. Welcome, Minister Councilor Archila. Are we having technical difficulties? I think you're still muted. You need to unmute, please. Okay. I guess we're having some technical difficulties. I think we'll have to come back to the Minister Councilor and start with Jaime. Do you mind starting our conversation today?
Yes, it's okay. I mean, what can work fine in this context in the pandemic? Everything may happen. I just want to let you know that Councilor Archila is right now in Putumayo, in a very isolated region. So he probably is having a little bit some problems with the internet. But until he fixes it, I'd like to share with you guys some of the data that we have gathered from the observatory. And I'd like to split this small, very, very quick presentation in three main subjects. First, what were the course of process in these regions in terms of creating jobs and everything, how things were going on, how things were going before COVID, what was the impact of COVID, and how the government is facing this crisis. First of all, let me see if I reduce this. First of all, we focus in working in these municipalities that are particularly affected by conflict, illicit crops, level of poverty, and weaknesses of institutional capacity. These are 170 municipalities that were selected within the peace agreement signed by the previous administration with the guerrilla FARC. What were the pre-pandemic trends in these regions? Let's say how things were going until 2019. As you can see, the green light is the level of increase of the taxes of industry and commerce. And you could see that there were like kind of growing up in a bigger pace than the national level. We also saw that the taxes on property collections in these municipalities was growing too. That is part of the regularization of the property and land property in these areas that were historically marginalized by conflict. However, day by day, we saw less people affiliated to the contributory health regime. This is an indicator of formal job creation. This number, the blue one, is subsidized by the government. That means that they don't appear as part of the formal labor force. So we also saw that until 2019, we saw 87 alliances that had impact in 170 municipalities. And this study that was done in alliance with USAID, the index for the social private investment index, we saw that only in 1 year, I mean in 2019, the private social investment in these regions were 50 million. That's a pretty important number when you bear in mind that the governmental entity in charge of responding to the regions, which is the ART, the Agency for Renovation of the Territory, its budget is 35 US million a year. So private sector is really interested in getting involved in these PDETS, and that's something very commendable in terms of that, like acknowledging the responsibility of financing regions that are basically under serious stress, so either by conflict, illegal economies, etc. So that was what was happening before COVID. I mean, there were economic activity growing in a bigger pace, in a much larger pace than the national average. There was an increasing of the regulation of the property. Large companies were investing large amount of resources in social investments in these regions, getting involved in this. The COVID really had an impact in the regions. First, when you see the number of new businesses that were created in these municipalities, look at 2014. Look at 2016 when the peace agreement was signed, and it started growing. And the first semester on the 2020, the reduction was of new businesses was significantly lower than it has coming. And you can see it both month by month. On January, the new businesses were created at a rate of 30,149 businesses, or about 30,000. In March, when COVID arrives to Colombia, it is reduced, and then you can see May, April, June, the huge impact on the creation of new businesses. Creating a business is more or less like a indicator of optimism. So this aspect, this shows how the COVID affected everybody's psychology in that moment. Also, the job creation. Job creation in PDET were particularly affected in the first semester of 2020. This is comparing with the same, timing. And the survival rate was significantly low. Only 31% of the companies created in 1929 renewed their register on the Chamber of Commerce. And you can see that almost 70%, in an average of 70% of companies did not renew their register certificate in 2020, meaning that they basically are not working as a formal businesses. So the impact was enormous, and the impact had also, and it also had an impact in aspects like access to credit in these municipalities. One silver line in the middle of this thing is that you can see that credits that credits that are being assigned are mainly for women, especially in microcredits. You can see in the blue line, in the purple line, the percentage of the credits that have been taken by women compared to the green ones that are the credits that are taken by men. The same happens in other kind of credits in consumer loans. It is much more closer, and in terms of housing loans, there's not a significant gap between men and women. This, just to give you an idea on how hard the COVID crisis impacted private sector in this region that needed so badly. I mean, we lost 70% of the companies that are based in these regions. That's basically it's very serious. We haven't been able to assess the change of social investments in 2019. We'll have that response by May, but we foresee a significant reduction of private sector social investment in these municipalities. However, you can see that the government response to the crisis has been good in terms of the following. Look at the number of local companies that have received support in business strengthening, which, by the way, is probably the most demanded aspect from local businesses. We had over the year, we have 16 different conversations in 16 different regions in which more than 500 local businesses participated, and business strengthening was a key issue. You see that even though there was a COVID situation, the number of the support of business strengthening reduction was minimal. Also, the mechanism of tax for works projects, which has been absolutely critical for these regions, it remains working quite well. Not at the level of the 2019, but bear in mind that in 2020 we were in the middle of the pandemic, so the taxes for the tax for work projects are also keeping some kind of pace in this matter, and the amounts of the money are showed here. But this can show this. Well, this is basically a general result. So again, we were coming from a path of recovery in these regions. These regions were reacting very well. Private sector was really showing a positive trend of creation, but COVID had a very hard impact in these fragile regions. On the other hand, we see that the government is still like pushing some efforts like business strengthening in these regions, like taxes by construction by taxes mechanism, but that's not enough. So as part of the observatory, in addition to the recommendations we've made and have been kindly accepted by the government and by our counterparts, we'd like to offer some other lines of actions. First, we still want to recommend to develop a specific approach to the exploitation of natural resources, oil, gas, and mining. 80% of the coal in Colombia is produced in PDETS. And actually one of the largest coal companies in Colombia, which is Prodeco, closed its operations last year, leaving 3,000 people out of job, and this year they are foreseen to fire about another 1,000 people. More than that is 20% of the GDP of the Cesar region. So the loss of Prodeco is a huge impact. However, there are other companies, investments interested in using natural resources. As you may know, because of the transition to new energies, the demand for mining materials, minerals is increasing significantly. We are talking about that in the next 20 years, the world has to exploit the amount of copper that has exploited over its entire human existence. So copper, lithium, natural resources are necessary for the energy transition. And also oil and gas are critical for this region. So develop a specific approach to the exploitation of natural resources in PDET, supporting the private sector and offering within their environmental plans actions to mobilize, to support PDETS plans. Also, one thing that is calling our attention is the lack of involvement of ports in those PDETS that have ports with their communities. In particular, last month we saw a critical situation in Buenaventura, but ports are not getting on the front of the situation, and we believe that we need to mobilize, make shareholders of those ports aware that their business will not be sustainable if they don't engage in transforming the territory. The third recommendation is identify private investment projects that may bring significant changes to PDET. That means private sector investment projects that, because are so large, need to be supported by the government and be monitored. So these projects overcome one and the other difficulties that building a business faces in Colombia, particularly in terms of procedures, permits, authorizations, local conflictivity. So we are asking the government to identify those strategic projects, private investment projects, potential investments that may bring significant changes to these regions. Again, sorry for repeating this one. The other one is develop financial incentives to promote provisions of goods and services from PDET. For example, if a company buys its products from a PDET region, a certain amount of that purchase could be reduced from my profit tax. That will allow to somehow balance the situation. Finally, the government could develop special lines to allow local businessmen to be contracted by the government. So the government not only moves the money into this region, but also develops that money helps private sector to flourish. And finally, exempt micro and small businesses located in PDETs from paying the renovation costs to the chambers of commerce, and to reduce the fiscal cost in procurement. Somehow it's kind of maintain the COVID recovery support package that the government has in place for a longer period of time. So if a small business is going to renew its register at the Chamber of Commerce, and that small business is located in a PDET, it shouldn't be an additional cost for the business. In addition, the costs of contracting personnel, the job costs are quite high, and we find that somehow these companies, because they are in a very difficult, they are not in a competitive situation with other private sector, so that could level the field for them. So that's pretty much what we seen from the observatory in terms of responding to the crisis. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Jaime. It appears the Minister Councilor Archila that you're now connected. So let's turn the microphone over to you. And I understand that you have a presentation that we're going to try to convey at the same time.
Yes, thank you and good morning. Thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to share with you all how we are doing in the implementation of the agreement with the ex-FARC guerrillas and what we call our peace with legality policy. As you are aware, this agreement was signed and our constitutional court ruled that it should be implemented for throughout 4 presidential terms. That means that for this unique time, Colombia will have 16 years in a row to resolve so many issues that we should have resolved decades ago with or without the agreement. Knowing that, President Duque issued his peace with legality policy less than 100 days after he was then in office. And there he addressed what is it that we consider that we are going to achieve in these first 4 years of implementation. In every area of the with legality policy, what we have done is to attend his President Duque's instructions in order to first be sure that we produce a political sign, a political statement, so that all Colombians and the rest of the world that is interested in the development of the implementations is conscious and have no doubts that we will comply, and that we understand that this is a state responsibility and that it was not the responsibility of a government, but that it embraces the Colombian state. Then having 15 years in order to having this opportunity of having 15 years to resolve so many issues, we have devoted a lot of time to make long-term planning so that we can take advantage of that opportunity. And then we need to produce results so that we provide the confidence that it is needed so that at the end of 2021, this process has no way back. We have done this in our support for the victims. The victims are in the center of all our attention. This is 9.5 million Colombians, most of them living in what Jaime has just described as the PDETS regions. 1 out of 3 victims is in those regions, and 1 out of 2 people that were displaced. The correct message, we sent urgent message. That is the message that is sent by the president when things need to be done very fast in the Congress. And in fact, we have obtained that renewal of the law so that we have another 10 years in order to work for them. And we have been producing results. I can describe that there are two areas of reparation. We have collective reparation when the damage was caused not to the individual, but to a collectivity, that being Colombians, females, or so. In the whole life of the law, and this is a law that precedes the agreements, just 2 of those have been finished, have been completed, and we have completed 28 at this moment. For next year, we have the biggest budget in order to indemnify victims. This is Colombian pesos, 1 billion. This is 12 serious billion. This is Colombian billions. That is, to give you an idea, at least 3 times the budget of the entity that constructs tertiary roads in Colombia. We understand that we need to work for the 13,000 ex-combats of the FARC that are in the reincorporation process. When we came to the government, by some reason that I don't understand, all the support was coming to an end in 2019. That was going to happen for the financial support, that was going to happen for the special system of health, and so we understand that the reincorporation process will take at least 7 or 8 years. So we introduced in the National Development Plan the idea of the reincorporation route map, and we negotiated that with the FARC. That was there is a document that was issued in December 2021, and we have been implementing that route. According to that, today 98% of the ex-combats are within the financial system. 85% of them have their health security. 85% of them have their pension is in a pension fund. We have created, and this is something into which you are going to be very sensible, and I know that Jaime understands that dimension. We have created more than 2,000 enterprises for them. This being medium and small enterprises, but it is 2,000. And if you add these economic projects to people, 13,000 families that will be in Colombia, a medium-sized town, if that was 52,000 people with their families. All the levels that of coverage that I have just described are far beyond the average in Colombia, and we will continue to work with them. We have been working in the same pace in voluntary substitution of coca. This is one of the tools that President Duque is using to fight the most aggressive and dangerous and damaging criminalities in our country. We received a program with 100,000 families to whom the former government had promised that they will have the support in order to leave the coca production. But they made the promise and they made no provisions. They made the promises and they made not the support, the contract to support them. No the technical assistance, no the provision of what is required for them to get into their definite crops. We understood that we need to comply with the word of the state, and we have been supporting those families. This has been an investment of more than 1 Colombian billion pesos, and as I mentioned, there is a lot of money. Bottom line, less than 1% of these families have dropped the program, and we have added to that additional programs through which families can voluntarily substitute. I am at this moment in Catatumbo. This is one of the PDETS areas. This is in the north part of Colombia, near to the border of Venezuela. And in here, we have received the support of the Buffett Foundation. He came here, he got to know what we are doing. He, in fact, got in love with one or two of our programs. And we have this that we call formalizing for substitution. In exchange to the family to engage in not going back to coca, we give them the title of the land or the legal permit so that they can work for a long period in that land. We added 1,200 families to what we are doing, and we have a third alternative that we call tailor-made. This is programs that we work with the departments, with the governors, and we get to know specifically what is it that the families are needing, and we go and we get this ongoing. We have this program with the 10 governors of the places where we have almost all the coca in the country. We understand that we need to stabilize the 170 municipalities that were more affected by violence and continue to be more affected by poverty. And the reason why is first, as Jaime was describing, because the gaps between Colombians, the average Colombia, and these territories is huge. This is 1/3 of our territory. And obviously we are not as big as the US, but Colombia is a very big country, and it is a very difficult geography. We are crossed by 3 mountain chains. We have more rivers than you can imagine. So the 1/3 of our territory that responds to those 170 municipalities is very complex, and in particular, it is very diffuse of people. It is 1/3 of the territory, but it is more or less 18% of the population. So people are far away. And when people are more than 5 hours away from the urban areas, that enables criminals not just to commit crimes, but to take control of the territory. And this combination of the absence of the state, illegal economies like coca, marijuana, illegal mining, marijuana creepy, you name it, has been reproducing violence in these territories since we were founded as a country. So the main reason to implement the PDETS, and I am sorry to say this, in this economic and enterprise and private sector area, is not just economic or social development, is security. And it is security not for the people in those areas, it is security for the whole country. And in fact, it is security for the US. In those territories, in 100 of the 170 municipalities, we have 95% of the coca that is grown in Colombia. So getting those municipalities to get in pace with the rest of the country will not only permit all Colombians to live without the levels of violence that we suffered when the FARC was out there, would not only permit all Colombians to have the economic development that we have achieved in these last years in all areas of the country without the violence burden and the violence over costs, but it will be a very efficient and powerful tool in order to get rid of the coca and the marijuana production once and forever. We made the plans. We went to the communities. We asked them, and we worked these plans with them. It was more than 2,200 people that dedicated a lot of time in order to identify their priorities. We received 2. We finished all 16 of the plans. These municipalities are grouped in 16 PDET areas. Then after, we have been focusing resources to implement the planning. As Jaime described it, we focused work for taxes. This is a very beautiful instrument through which the private sector can, instead of giving all the income tax, devote up to 50% of it to construct one of those initiatives. We made a constitutional and legal amendment to the way how royalties of gas and oil are distributed, and 7% of this is invested now in the implementation of the PDET. If we add these 2 sources of money and what we are doing with the national budget and the international community, that is almost 5 Colombian billion pesos. 5 Colombian billion pesos could be almost half of the cost of the metro in Bogotá. Metro in Bogotá will be like 12 or 15 billion pesos. So this is the amount of money that so far we are investing in these municipalities, and we will continue to do so for the next 15 years. We understand that everything that we need to do have a gender approach and an ethnic approach. I work very close with the representatives of the gender implementation and the ethnic implementation. And this means that everything that I have described and I will describe at the end of this intervention is done with that kind of emphasis. We work very hard in demining. Everything that we do in the territories needs to be backed by a very robust demining program, and we have produced more municipalities to be free of mines than the whole history of the program. We have this rural development plan. In this, we have 4 chapters. We have a rural development plan for the social stability. This means that we have produced the most ambitious budget for education in rural zones. This means that we have doubled the budget that we had for what we call Salud rural health. We have the subchapter of infrastructure. In that chapter of infrastructure, we have the most money that is devoted to tertiary roads in the history of the country. This will be at least 6 times the annual budget that the Ministry of Infrastructure had in the past. We have a program to take electricity to the rural zones, and in these 4 years, we will do more than what has been done in the past 12 years. To give you an idea, here in the Catatumbo, we made the promise that in 1 year, we will bring 12 ¿cómo dice acueductos? No. How do you say aqueductos, Jaime?
Water supply.
12 water supply solutions, and we produced 20.
Water pipes, consejero.
Thank you, water pipes. We made the promise that we will bring electricity to 2,000 families, and we brought electricity through 3,200 families. We made the promise that we will invest 20,000 million pesos, and we ended the year with 100,000 million pesos. Just to make to finish and to have enough time for me to answer all questions and inquiries, we have advanced in what needs what is called the legal guarantees and the political guarantees in an admirable manner as a country, not just the government, but as a country. In 3 years, we changed our constitution. We enabled the ex-convicts to form a political party. They are a political party. Indeed, they have just recently changed their name. They are in the Congress, in both chambers of the Congress, and due to the protection that we gave to them, they participated in the most peaceful or one of the most peaceful local elections in the past 60 years. And we have been respectful of the transitional justice. We have budgeted the transitional justice. This is a huge amount of money, and all three entities. This is the tribunal. This is the mission for the truth. This is the unit for the search of the disappeared. They have been fully budgeted, and they are working without any interference from the government. So I'll leave it to there, and obviously I am more than open to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Minister Counselor. I'm sure we will have some questions. We're starting to get a few coming in already, but before we go to questions and answers, I'd like to pass the microphone to Natalie for her comments. Natalie, you have the mic.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me good? Great.
Yes.
No, after Jaime's and Minister Archila's remarks, I don't really want to repeat most of the things that they've both shared. I would just compliment and highlight a few comments and maybe more stories. I think the first thing, and it was very interesting to see Jaime's presentation, I think the first thing that we saw and we felt as USAID implementing in these PDETS municipalities is exactly that slide that Jaime presented, where, you know, in April, there were so many fewer number of new businesses. I think part of what we saw in the territories, and again, I'll be sharing a little bit more of stories and what we saw, is that the pandemic in its first months of uncertainty left a lot of people without any answers. And we saw that there were many breaks in the value chains. Part of the breaks in the value chains happened because there were no protocols in place. We didn't really all have the answers, and it's not just USAID that didn't have the answers, but our private sector partners didn't have the answers. And specific municipalities and mayor offices were still trying to figure out what was the right way to keep providing, you know, not just supplies, but also food for the entire country. So I would just highlight that in the beginning of the pandemic, places where USAID works, which are the PDETS municipalities, we saw that many of these areas, like Minister Archila said, these are isolated, conflict-affected areas, and we just saw that there were a lot of breaks in the value chain, and that's when USAID and other donors really jumped in and tried to figure out a way of nurturing those relationships and making sure that suppliers were still linked to providers in the areas, and just trying to make sure that these value chains would have the right, I guess, logistical work, permisos, to have the value chains just not break and not come to a complete stop, but just keep on functioning. I think that that's one of the things that we saw. The second thing that we saw a lot, and I think that Jaime expressed it really well with the data, but we saw how informality, which has been an issue in Colombia, like Minister Archila said, for many years, just became even more of an issue because informality, specifically in employment, these are folks who are not getting the benefits. You know, we saw that unemployment rates really dropped for the most part of last year. So given those in unemployment rates spiking, there were a lot of informality became an issue. We saw that it was hard for micro businesses, for example, to get, funding that the national government was offering, all these aids and benefits. It was very hard for them to access these benefits because they were not formalized companies, or the employees were not formal employees. So I think one of the things that the first couple of months made also USAID and our team think about is what can we do more to promote this kind of formal sector. We worked a lot, and we work currently with a lot of cajas de compensación, and we see that there are opportunities, and like Jaime presented, prior to COVID, we were really seeing how the numbers were shifting in a forward-leaning way. Cajas de compensación were getting more formal employees, more companies were providing these benefits to their companies, but then COVID comes along, and like Jaime presented, so many businesses closed, and then so many more informal businesses came up, and the cost of being formal was just too much for companies to bear. I think the other thing that we also saw is that women were deeply affected, and I think I'm not speaking anything new, but we did see how gender-based violence is affecting women, specifically in their economic development. But we also saw how intrafamilial violence is also affecting families in this way, and also their micro or small or businesses. And we saw that again during the first couple of months of the pandemic. So I would just say that the first couple of months with the uncertainty of what was going on, the breaking of many value chains, the breaking, the loss of so much jobs, the closing of so many companies, even if they were small companies, really affected all of our work. I would just like to share some positive things that we've seen and some opportunities that we've seen. I think what we saw is, for instance, we have two partnerships directly with private sector, one with Banca Mía and the other one with Corporación Interactuar. Both of these partnerships are led by the private sector, and these were partnerships that were signed prior to COVID. And these are partnerships that are looking to strengthen companies. And like Jaime presented, more and more companies after a couple of months of the pandemic started to request these services to really support and accompany their companies, either through growth or, like I mentioned, to having specific value chains support, or maybe offering some kind of technical information or even supplies. So these are partnerships that in the past we've implemented in PDETS municipalities in more than 70 municipalities. However, with the pandemic, we really had to start to provide these support services virtually. And what we've seen in the past month is that we've reached a higher number of entrepreneurs. We've reached a higher number of companies. Still, it's just two partnerships. We understand that the scale and the need for this should be bigger, like Jaime presented. However, there was an opportunity, given connectivity, given cell phone connectivity, but also through traditional printed material. We saw the opportunity, and I've seen the numbers. We've scaled how these support services for companies, for businesses has really thrived. The second thing I would just mention is that in that support service that we provided, more women have really rise to the occasion, like Jaime said. And these are types of programs that are accompanying more and more women. And we've seen how those indicators, so it's either accessing more credit, or it's either requesting business support services. But also we've seen how they've been able to reinvent themselves. And I think that's one of those words that we heard a lot about last year. You know, how do companies reinvent themselves? And I think we saw how women were really leading on those three issues. I wanted to also share a story of something that happened in Antioquia, and I think it's a great example of how companies are really, you know, starting to look at other value chains. So we, as I mentioned, have a partnership with Interactuar, and it's a partnership that is providing business services and credit, and also employment services, specifically in the area of Bajo Cauca in Antioquia. And for the past 2 years, we've been supporting a company called Enemar Confecciones, which is basically a company that does school outfits for kids and teachers. However, when the pandemic started, as we all know, schools closed, public schools, well, public and private schools closed. So about in March, the company really, their sales and their purchase orders were completely canceled. School was canceled by the end of March. And so there were no orders for new, you know, outfits for school, or uniforms. Is that the word? So we started to think about, you know, what's going to happen really. And Antioquia is a region where there's a lot of confection services and companies. So we really started to think about, you know, what could, you know, how to really pivot these partnerships that have a preconceived notion of what, you know, the territories are looking for. But then here comes COVID. So one of the opportunities that came up was the idea of making face masks, and the Gobernación de Antioquia, which is, you know, the local government in Antioquia, reached out to USAID directly and said, look, we're looking to provide 6.4 million face masks for all of our Antioquia municipalities, for all the people who live there. You know, USAID, can you provide some funding? And we really came up with a really great solution. Instead of really thinking about, you know, come to USAID looking for funding, we really said, you know, we have these partnerships with the private sector. They're providing these business services to companies, small, micro, and medium enterprises. Why don't we see if they can produce those face masks instead of USAID just giving that funding? And just to make the story, you know, make it really shorter than it is, at the end, we see an opportunity that COVID really did provide other kinds of necessities. We have been supporting confection or manufacturing companies to make face masks that obviously comply with all the national regulations. And just to give you an example, this specific micro company called Enemar, you know, who had prior to COVID 10 employees, today has 31 employees, so they have grown. And they were able to manufacture more than 30,000 masks in a short period of like 2 to 3 months. So I'm just sharing this story because I do think that at the end we do see other opportunities. The third opportunity that we do see is digital connectivity and technology. We've seen how the private sector really wants to not only be connected, you know, have these kind of Zoom events and meetings, save on the travel costs or the office costs, but we've seen how really digital connectivity is really working in the PDETS municipalities. So to tell you another story, I was speaking with a vendor that has a small supermarket in Tarazá, in Bajo Cauca, and he was telling me that during the first weeks of the pandemic, he was very worried because he had to close his small supermarket. And after a couple of like days, his neighbors starting to send him WhatsApp messages. And, you know, fast forward a couple of months more, today he's telling me that he is receiving WhatsApp orders online. He is receiving, like Minister Archila said, many of the communities are now financially strengthened, but also they have digital services on their phones. So he's receiving digital transfers online through his cell phone, so he gets paid. And then he provides the delivery of the supermarket to his neighbors or people nearby. And he was telling me that these are things that happened during the first months of the pandemic, but still today, consumers in areas like Tarasa are really, they find it easier instead of having to go all the way to the supermarket. Sometimes many of them are living in different farms. They just send him a WhatsApp. They transfer the funding through their smartphones, and then they get the delivery service a couple of days later. So I do think that that's another thing, and that's another one of those opportunities that we've seen for that, because of COVID. Again, I just want to be mindful of the time. I think those are some of the examples. And I think the last thing I'll just, share with everyone is that we have seen, and this is something that we've worked with a lot with Jaime and many of the private sector partners that we have in the mission, that there is a mechanism called the Global Development Alliance. It's a mechanism that USAID has had for many years. And it's a mechanism that really has worked well to see how, the USAID's funding can really catalyze ideas from the private sector. And in December of this year, I just want to take advantage of this meeting, of this space. In December of this year, we published a new opportunity, and it's an opportunity that really responds to that, the economic recuperation of Colombia. So currently, right now, there is an open opportunity for private sector to engage with the USAID, engage with the public sector, obviously with the national government, but also with local authorities, and come to have a conversation with USAID about economic recuperation. And hopefully they can present an idea, and it's something that's open for funding. We've seen how this mechanism really works well with incentivizing the private sector to go into the PDET areas and invest in these areas, but really from a market-driven, market-oriented perspective. We currently at the mission have 10 signed GDAs, but like I mentioned, we have this new opportunity that's available, open for everyone to read, to download. It's on grants.gov. John, I'm taking advantage of the 2 minutes, but it is something that is there. We have, it's limited funding, but it's a mechanism that really has worked, and we believe that can definitely benefit the communities where we work in these municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for some very interesting stories about confronting the pandemic and its challenges. And that's as we move into questions and answers, I'd like to expound upon that a little bit. Perhaps Minister Archila and Jaime can respond to some of the challenges that you've laid out. I mean, the pandemic has challenged all of us in the developed world as much as the developing world, and even more so in regions like the PDET. It's hard for some of us to even imagine how challenging that must be to sort of meet that kind of an obstacle. But I'm wondering also, I mean, there's also a history of leapfrogging technologies, using different types of digital technologies to get past these sorts of barriers in regions like that. We first saw it, moving past like hardwired phone lines and into cellular technology. So I'm wondering if both of you can maybe talk a little bit about how the pandemic may have shifted the imperatives of the kind of investment that goes into the PDET. Is there more emphasis now on digital technology, on attaining connectivity so that people can find digital solutions to the pandemic? We all expect that the world is not going to really return exactly to where it was before we started on all of this challenge, and that this is going to advance the whole issue of digital engagement. So I'm wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about what you might see in the future of investment in the PDET as a way to sort of meet this digital technology challenge and the challenge of the pandemic, even as we leave it.
Sure, and thank you very much for the question. And obviously, I'll take the opportunity to thank the U.S. government, the U.S. people, and USAID. The support and the alignment that we have received from them to our priorities is really remarkable. In 3 years, we have been able to align almost all of the USAID programs to the government. priorities, and I mean, I cannot highlight enough how important that is. Now, I will have some contrasting opinion with the view. And what I will say, and I will make it a graphic just to challenge the discussion, is that the good news is that due to the pandemic, nothing happened in our plans. And let me, let me explain why that is such a good news. First, we are very aware that we need the international support, and we need the international support in order to fully implement the agreements from a political standing, and that is very important, and from the financial standing, and also in what has to do with technical assistance. But we have always been very aware that we cannot fully rely or depend in international economic support, because that will make the implementation fragile. The way that that this is financed, I mean, grossly, very grossly, is like 80% Colombian resources, 20% the whole international community. So, and I do think that this is very important for us not to be vulnerable to volatilities that as it could have been with the pandemic. The national budget, the royalties are devoted to the implementation and welfare taxes. They were not affected by pandemic. We did not change our long-term objectives, and that is, in my opinion, remarkable from our side, and also all the entities in U.S. aid also that work with us, because we need to know that we are working in a very long-term planning. Even more further, in the plan for economic recovery of President Duque, one of 4 pillars is peace with legality, and peace with legality is investment in these municipalities. Now, from a short-term economic view, that would not have been intelligent because there are very few people there, and as they are very difficult to produce an impact, it is more costly than going into the cities. The job loss to Colombia could be around 20 or more % of the jobs. That is more or less the full population that we have in our territories. So it has been a political admirable decision from President Duque to not only maintain the support to the PDETS implementation, but to have it in mind as one of the pillars for the economic recovery. Then I will contrast, or at least I would like to hear Jaime, his opinion, and is that, the creation of new enterprises in the PDETS areas is a sign. But what could have been very grave was that the traditional companies left the territories. These are territories that, they have a lot of environmental vocation, a lot of extraction vocation, a lot of agriculture vocation. And those economic endeavors tend to be long-term endurance, and I didn't see people getting out of the territories, and that is a very, in my opinion, a very good news. Then I will finish. describing that in the planning, in the PDET planning, one of 8 chapters, one pillar is economic development. And that in economic development, we have the long-term vision for every one of those 16 regions. This means that we know what people will be expecting. We know what is the vocation of the land in every area of these ones. We are devoting a huge amount of investment and planning to give the support to those enterprises in the medium and long term. So in line with what Natalie was recommending to go and talk to USAID, I will emphasize the importance in talking to USAID, but for USAID to bring you to that planning, so that you can be very aware of how is it that the territories are going to be transformed. And let me finish by saying this, and this is also trying to challenge people. If you were bargaining with a state from with a country, and you as private sector were going into that area, what we are doing is what you will ask us to do, just that we are doing it for free. So we are making the education reforms. We are making the infrastructure reforms. We are focusing investments. We are doing the long-term planning, and we are providing all this with the legal strength so that this will endure for 3 administrations. I will need. I need to get into a flight, into a helicopter. I will have to leave it there. I'm very sorry that at the end I did not answer questions.
Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your participation, Minister Counselor. So we certainly understand that you have to depart, but we appreciate your answering at least a few of the questions throughout.
Thank you so much.
Jaime, would you like to respond to
yes,
the question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't want to miss that we just had a peek of the front line and how it's working in the front line in these PDETS. I mean, you could see it directly from where the setting where the minister, with the consular is taking our call. And that shows somehow the kind of condition a business will be in the middle of a war or military zone or conflict zone, but also it's able to connect with a conversation to US. So the connection and the technology has played an incredible role in these circumstances. One of the I think the most challenging thing is to understand that this is a marathon, but also a sprint. I mean, businessmen and companies cannot wait for 15 years of implementing structural investments to do their businesses. But also we cannot we cannot just leave that away. And if we think as a marathon, as a sprint, we need to think also on a long term what the strategic benefits that each one of the PDETS bring to the table, because each one is different. For example, let's take the PDETS of Guajira, Catatumbo, where the consular is right now, and Arauca. One day, sooner or later, the reconstruction of Venezuela will start. The energy that Venezuela needs for its recovery will be provided through Guajira, where their energy production is significant to export energy to this region. The food supply will be provided through which other part of the border? Catatumbo. Oil supply will come from Arauca. So these 3 regions have a middle term or long-term strategic value, because Venezuela will start its reconstruction sooner or later. On the other hand, you have PDETS where are ports. that are important for international trading, without having the shareholders of those ports being aware of their responsibility to the regions, will be hard for get them to have them a more significant role. And also there are PDETS that offer environmental resources that will play a significant role in reducing the global warming. That's in the long term. In the short term, I think we need to see these regions as a post-war regions, and as it has happened before. I'm not only referring, for example, the measures that were taken to reinvigorate the production and the economies of after World War II. I'm talking about also closer examples as the measures that were taken to recover after in north of Ireland after their conflict. So we need to figure out a way to develop for those PDETS kind of set of rules that respond to the reality that they are under recovered regions, and that is in short term that has to be declared. Somehow, well, no one wants to say that a part of your territory is recovering from war, but it is something that's happening. So it is fine. It is a marathon and also a sprint, and it's such long-term solutions, but also short-term response to allow the recovery. And technology is a critical aspect from the short-term response.
Thank you very much, Jaime. We only have a few minutes left in our session today. We do have an interesting question from one participant about security issues, and I'm sorry the minister had to leave because it'd be interesting to hear from him on this. But with the pandemic, perhaps the two of you can address whether or not security concerns have increased in the PDET. Is it worse than it was, or perhaps has the nature of the security challenge in those areas of the country changed with the onset of the pandemic? Natalie, maybe you have some observations on that?
Yeah, sure. I do think, and this is something that has been more and more in the news. And I don't know if everyone saw, but there was a UN report that was published in December of this past year. Yes, I think the answer is yes. In the PDET regions, we have seen an increase in violence in rural areas. We've seen increase in massacres, and we've also seen an increase in human rights defenders, homicides and murders. It is still, like Jaime said, and Minister Archila said, it is still difficult and tough to work in the PDET municipalities. I do think after the peace accord was signed, the violence in these rural areas definitely decreased. But in the past year, because of the pandemic, because of so much lockdown, because of these regional, I guess, concentrations, we have seen that increase in violence. But what we've seen, and again, showing just a positive view, is that, private sector is still there. Private sector is still investing in rural areas. And then we also have seen that, more and more communities are coming together to, create safe spaces. So we do see that there are opportunities still to work with these communities. USAID is very present in these areas. We've also tried to work with communities to come up with, safe and citizen security plans. But, to the question, we have seen an increase in violence in the areas just in the past year. I don't know if Jaime wants to comment a little bit.
Well, security has deteriorated significantly in any region. What we've seen in Buenaventura is beyond our worst nightmare. And also, well, Catatumbo is facing important challenges. There are a lot of illegal armed groups in the border with Venezuela. narco traffic keeps being the main fueling of the resources. So, but also illegal mining is being expanded because the states hasn't been able to control that phenomenon. So security has deteriorated, and there's no way to. I mean, that's a serious issue. It was something that everybody expected after a peace agreement. I mean, the reorganization of those former combatants that were not that did not follow the agreement, or just went to the insurgencies again, or the illegal criminal the legal bands, the criminal bands. That was expected, but COVID complicated things much more.
Thank you very much. We have a follow-on question to that. Are there statistics that sort of bear out some of the aspects that you just mentioned? The two of you, are there places that we could direct our audience to for data on this topic?
Yes, I mean, the monitoring of that, CERAC is the center that monitors those indicators in the region, but it's not that difficult to see the coverage media and the impacts that it's having COVID in these regions.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. I don't know if we just are down to our last couple of minutes. I do want to mention to our audience that in the chat box, you can find links to follow CIPE and our Future of Work team for future events on different topics related to how work is evolving, you know, in the pandemic and moving into the post-pandemic era. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on Facebook and on Twitter. So you'll see the links in the chat box. But before we finish the session, do either of you have any final remarks that you'd like to make, or any tips for the future of how we address these issues? Natalie?
I think, in general, I would just say, let's take this opportunity to hopefully, build back better, which also goes to something that we spoke about a lot last year, which is, it's an economic recovery, but hopefully it's economic sustainable recovery. So there are opportunities to do it better, to do it more holistically. And I think that is the opportunity that we have, just to think of it not just through an economic lens, but hopefully through a social and also an environmental lens. It's how we're taking it. And again, like I mentioned, there are incentives and there are mechanisms to work together, private sector, the donors, and also obviously the government of Colombia. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Jaime, the work that you're doing on monitoring the direction of investment is so very important, so that we know early on what's happening with investment. Is it increasing? Is it changing in terms of the nature of it? So are there ways in which we can keep track of the work that you're doing in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, please go into our the web page of the observatory. It has all the indicators and the data updated, the most updated data on how is the private sector doing in these regions. I just want to say that one of CIPE's mantra is expanding democracy through a strong private sector. That I can't imagine a better situation in which that goal is so important. I mean, we need to expand democratic institutions to the PDETS, and private sector is by far the most stable and the most important player, or one of the most important players in this region. So somehow this idea of CIPES, of expanding democracy through strong private sector, applies completely in the PDETS transformation.
Well, thank you, Jaime. I couldn't have said that any better myself. So thank you for taking my parting lines. And as I said before, We will have future events on this topic. I see that my colleagues have just put the link in the chat box for the Observatorio, for those of you who are interested in following that. So we look forward to hosting you for future events. We'll be exploring those linkages between democracy and the private sector, and innovative approaches throughout the region on developing the future of work. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you in abstention to our to the Minister Councilor Archila for participating in this, and I wish you all a good morning and a good afternoon.
Afternoon. Bye.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.